Welcome to part 5 of our live training session here with our 2003 Subaru WRX. In our last video, we looked at the boost control tuning process that completed all of the tuning that we have to do looking at our fuel, spark, and boost control. Now we're going to be taking a look at getting our engine fired up on day 2 when the engine is bone cold and making sure that we have the proper cranking fuel, post-start fuel, and warm-up enrichment so we're not running too rich or too lean. And then we're also going to be taking a look at off-dyno drivability testing, making sure it drives good, making sure the boost is tracking where it should be, and how to evaluate our data in Megalog Viewer. Finally, we're going to wrap up this video taking a look at setting up a basic launch control using the Carberry ROM on our WRX. We have a lot to cover in this training tutorial, so let's jump in so we can get started. Welcome back to our live training session here with our Subaru WRX. Now, we've completed the calibration process from going through the fuel tuning, going through the spark timing tuning, and doing the boost control tuning. So at this point, we're left with an engine and vehicle here that are pretty much calibrated. However, we need to verify one last step. That's going to be making sure the engine's going to fire off cold and have an appropriate air fuel as it's warming up. Now we're also going to have to verify all the work we've done off the chassis dyno in real world conditions. So we're going to be taking a look at going through and capturing a data log of actual driving the vehicle off the chassis dyno and then reviewing that data to know what to go back in and check if we have anything we have to go in and touch up. And then finally we'll be taking a look at the end of this video doing launch control testing and just making sure that that's all dialed in and set up for this vehicle. We're going to just do a basic launch control two-step for the vehicle. It's not going to be heavily drag race, but just something that it's there in case the owner wants to actually launch the car. So we're going to go through just tidying up the loose ends with our calibration. This is what you're going to need to do to any vehicle that you're working with. So let's jump in here. Let's start off with talking about our cold start and making sure that the warm-up enrichment and all of our fuel trims are applied correctly. Now, when we built our base calibration file, we went in, we did some very specific things, going in and making sure that our target air fuel on a cold engine was right, making sure that we added some additional fuel to our warm-up and enrichment table to match the offset in the desired target air fuel on a cold engine. We did that for a very specific reason because as we're firing up and getting the engine to run, if we have too lean of a mixture and the closed loop kicks on too soon with too lean of a mixture, it can go into idle surge problems, which is a very common problem with Subarus that are modified with larger injectors. So we went through and we've set up some tables and we're going to review that right now to make sure everything is going to fire off and run properly. Then we're actually going to see how it performs. The changes that we made, do they work properly? Do we need to tweak those? Do we need to adjust them? Because this is something that you're going to have to go through for sure after you've done the main calibration process. And I do want to point out at this point in time that I do have my wideband connected to the vehicle and I have it going through the serial stream on our ROM Radar logging. We can review what's going on with that. Now the key detail here with the wideband that I want to point out is that I have the wideband wired to a normal power source, meaning I'm actually wiring it to battery power, not to a key-on power source. I've done this for a very specific reason, taking a look at the cold start, so that the wideband itself has a constant power source and that when I'm going in and cranking the engine over, it doesn't reset the wideband and make it go through the heater sequence again. What's going to happen in that case, we're going to lose the first 30 to maybe 60 seconds of the engine firing off and running and looking at what the actual wideband is reading compared to what the OEM primary sensor is going to be reading. We want to see what the actual air fuel is doing, not what the primary sensor is doing, because the primary sensor may not be 100% accurate within the first maybe minute of the engine warming up. So we always want to keep track of that, and that's one step that I've taken. Again, I've wired the wideband directly to the battery just to do this testing here so I can see exactly what's going on and review that log data. Now, some other points I want to make here, taking a look at the cold start and warm-up enrichment, is that we can't perform this when we initially got the engine to fire off and run before we calibrated the mass airflow table and the speed density table, because those are going to account for the base injector pulse width as we're operating our engine in the normal warmed up state, so 170, 180 degrees and warmer. We don't want to go in and try to deal with our post-start or the warm-up enrichment when we haven't dialed in the base pulse width. The warm-up and post-start are a percentage of fuel modifiers that go on top of the base pulse width coming from those calculations. So in this situation, if we try to go in and dial in our post-start and our warm-up enrichment in terms of air fuel and getting those tables dialed in when the engine hasn't been calibrated in that main pulse width, so we haven't dialed in the MAF curve, we haven't dialed in our injector data, so the latency hasn't been tweaked or the flow rate hasn't been tweaked to get to where we want to be, or the main VE table, if you're in full speed density mode, hasn't been dialed in, hasn't been accounted for yet. We can't really understand what to do yet with the post-start and the warm-up because that base pulse width might be too little or too much. So we might be too lean or too rich. And as a result, the post-start and the warm-up are going to be applied on top of that. That could skew up the results of the post-start and warm-up. So at this point, we know when the engine was warmed up and it was running. We had good fuel trim data in idle and part throttle, so in closed loop. So we know when we're firing it off now, we can take a look at what is going on with our closed loop as it kicked in, going in and taking a look at the post-start and the warm-up. Do we need to adjust those? How much do we need to adjust them by? The key thing here, again, to take away is that we've dialed in the MAF and speed density operation on a warm engine already. Now we can directly take a look at any deviations in the air fuel from the post-start and warm-up as the engine's coming up to operating temperature, because we know that everything applied on top of the base pulse width is going to be either incorrect or correct depending on what we find here for the results. The key thing is the base pulse width is dialed in properly on a warm engine. So these are modifiers, they're percentage modifiers that are added on top of the base pulse width coming from those other air mass calculations depending on what mode we're operating in. What I have open is the very last file that we were working with, the boost control file. Everything else is going to be the same as we talked about in that tutorial going through. We dialed everything in. So I've let the vehicle sit overnight. That's the key here for cold start. I let it sit overnight for 24 hours. We're now going to be taking a look at firing it off bone cold. And in fact, if we go into ROM Radar, I actually have that running right now looking at the live data. We do see the coolant temperatures. Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here. And you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.